All right, hey everyone. Welcome post-lunch, pre-coma. Hopefully we got the perfect little zone. So the panel today is going to be about paid and organic and the unique relationship that exists between them, how one works off of the other, and we're just going to explore that and hopefully make all of us a little bit smarter by the time we get out the back end. So I'm Sean Ellis. I'm the founder and CEO of GrowthHackers. Next to me, we've got Esther Hwang. She is the senior marketing manager at Poshmark, the largest social marketplace for fashion, where she focuses on expanding profitable mobile and web channels. So welcome. And then next to her, we've got Richard Ha, who is the mobile and social marketing manager at Zillow. And Zillow, of course, you guys know Zillow locally here, online real estate marketplace. He focuses on user acquisition and engagement for Zillow's mobile apps. And then finally, we've got Jen Taylor. Jen is the Senior Director of Audience Development at A&E Networks, where she is responsible for driving growth across their digital platforms, so that's both web and mobile, and across their portfolio of networks. So A&E, History, Lifetime, all those channels that have been around for a long time. So welcome, guys. It does sound like that both Jen and Esther are looking at mobile and web. And then Richard, are you primarily mobile, or do you do web as well?
Yeah, so I'm on the performance marketing team at Zillow, and under that umbrella, we handle web, search, but I'm on the team that focuses on mobile apps. But we all kind of like work together.
Okay, cool. So as we explore this, you guys might be able to give some insights on how web and mobile work together here, as well as organic and paid working together. But I think maybe before we kick into a lot of questions on how they work together, maybe I think paid is pretty self-explanatory on what paid marketing is, but as far as the organic, how are you guys defining organic? Do you want to take that?
Sure. So I'd say organic, the definition for organic varies by company, as well as within a company by channel and by platform. So I think for mobile, we look a lot at various things. There's nothing truly purely organic, which to me would be, a word of mouth that you heard from a friend. But outside of that, we have outside a certain attribution window, right? And we're always testing what is the ideal attribution window, as well as view-throughs. Which is also a paid lifted organic conversion. Those are, I think, primarily the two that we look at for mobile. Now, when we look at cross-platform, we also look at, web lift, organic web lift that might come from our mobile paid efforts as well. So I think depending on which channel, which platform you look at, organic should be, the definition of organic should be kind of tailored to that specific parameter.
Right. Is there anything that you guys would add to that?
So I'm going to be contentious and say I don't like the word organic. I feel like it implies that it just magically happened, and I would argue that most organic traffic comes from a tactic that's been implemented. So we usually talk about organic in 3 different buckets. The first one is owned media. So how do we leverage all of the platforms that our network has to drive installs and engagement? Partnerships, so how do we use earned media to do that? And then direct, because we just don't know where that's coming from. But normally most of the earned media, whether it's coming through organic search or a partnership, we can identify.
Okay, so like organic search would be part of that non-existent organic?
I would argue organic search is earned media because we work with our SEO tactics to increase our ranking.
What about you, Richard? Anything else you'd add to the definition so we know what we're talking about?
I'd say we're more in line with what Jen's talking about. So we do paid, and then we look at owned, so our own channels. And then kind of like everything left is what we consider organic, but we try to attribute as much as we can to either a paid or some channel that we own.
Okay. So then how does paid actually help with the organic side? Or does it?
For Zillow, it doesn't. We've done testing where we've seen like, oh, when we spend more on paid, how does it impact our organic rankings? And I think like for Zillow, we're pretty strong already in like the app stores. So we don't really see a lift that a smaller app might see from paid. So for us, it's more like which channel, like it's thinking more like the paid and the owned side is being smarter of working with the owned team of understanding like which is the best channel to reach our users. Obviously, we don't want to pay to contact a user if we could do it for free, but sometimes it makes more sense just thinking about how users use their mobile devices in a normal day. Yeah, so that's kind of how we work with organic.
Okay, so Poshmark would be a newer brand, I think. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong there.
We've actually been ranking pretty high in the App Store for a while too, and we've been around long enough where we've seen our paid growth really contribute and amplify our organic growth.
Okay,
and I
but
think
you do see an impact from paid on organic.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's why one of the main KPIs that we always look at is blended costs on the growth team, because that is kind of our number one, finger on the pulse is our paid growth cannibalizing organic, in which case we're going in the wrong direction. We have the wrong portfolio of paid channels. Or is our blended cost, which is our cost for our organic users and our paid users, is that going down over time? Then that's your number one indicator that your paid growth is actually complementing your organic growth, then eating into it. So that's, for the paid growth team, kind of your highest level metric of health.
So how long have you been with Poshmark? Were you there in the early days when it was still kind of kicking up that organic?
Back in, so I've been there for about 3 years now, and a lot has changed over time, not just in the mobile growth landscape, but obviously how we do growth operations within the company. When I first joined, we were primarily Facebook, just trying to get as many installs as possible, and just kind of having very blunt tools around just like increase on that channel and like decrease on that entire channel. Since then, our growth rate has actually like 5x'd while maintaining costs. And I think a lot of factors play into that, like different ways of operating, different tracking capabilities, more granular tracking capability. So yeah, I'd say a lot has changed in the last 3 years I've been there.
So would you guys say that organic is more dependent on paid in the early days when you're trying to build that momentum, or does it stay about the same over time?
I think for Poshmark, and Richard touched upon it, it's really a lot easier to see paid's contribution to organic when you have such a smaller user base. Your delta is just much more measurable. When you get to a certain level of user growth, then and there's a lot more factors, so it's a little bit more difficult to measure. I
mean, it sounds like it's probably the attribution challenge that all marketers face everywhere. I mean, how do you guys deal with attribution at A&E, especially with organic? You mentioned that organic is a function of all those other things that you're doing, but how do you know that for sure?
Yeah, so any owned tactic or earned tactic, we measure. We have analytics on them so that we can actually attribute them to those tactics. But we know that any paid campaign we run has incremental value that's untrackable. So somebody installs our app through a paid campaign, they love it, they tell their friends about it, their friend installs, we're not going to track that. Somebody sees an ad on their phone, they don't click on it, they come back on web later and sign up. We can't track it. So we know that there's incremental installs driven through our paid tactics that are untrackable.
Okay.
Yes.
And then, so the blended cost kind of question is there like a formula to the blended cost, or is it, how exact is that? Or is it just kind of a gut a little bit?
It's pretty straightforward. It's all your ad spend, as well as any kind of referral spend or promotion spend that you have out there, and then all your new buyers or new users for us, as well as new buyers for us. That's our kind of quality downfollow metric that we look at. That's how we define blended cost.
That's actually something we want to test, is when we do paid media, how much of an incremental organic increase does that drive? We're making it up a little bit right now. For some of our reports, we're attributing 30% of all trackable paid media. There's an incremental, of the trackable paid media, there's an incremental 30% of all of our other, I'm not explaining this well. So we have our paid media, then we have the installs driven by our trackable paid media, and then we have all installs driven outside of that. We're currently attributing 30% of that other bucket to untrackable paid media. So we have our trackable paid media, our untrackable paid media, and then our owned and earned.
Okay. So Richard, does organic help sort of justify paid, or how do you think about that at Zillow?
We treat it kind of differently. So all of our paid advertising, we kind of have a specific goal based on what we know about paid users. And so we kind of don't think about the impact on organic from paid advertising. We kind of look at paid as its own thing. I think we're starting to get to the point, kind of similar to what Jen was talking about, where, so we have owned channels. For example, you could get a app upsell on our mobile website, and we get a lot of mobile website traffic from other paid campaigns. And so matching those paid campaigns to the mobile web upsells, so that's kind of like tying like non-app install advertising spend to those people ultimately downloading the app. So that's kind of how we're starting to bridge the gap more of the owned channels with paid advertising in general.
But what about, so not just that they download the app, but that they then tell people about it? Yeah,
definitely like all the in-app actions so we measure everything, not just on the installs, so it's all the engagement within the app, so we want people to browse listings, contact agents, save searches, and everything in the app. So we actually base all of our advertising performance on the cost per all these different events.
But then do you also try to factor in that I was showing Zillow to my father. He asked, how much that old house you had worth? And bringing up Zillow, he's like, man, that's cool that you can actually see his estimate on your old house. So at one point I was exposed to it through an ad, and then I'm talking about that there's this sort of chain of spreading that happens. Are you trying to factor that into your paid acquisition, or is it just a bonus?
I would say not at this time. I mean, that example is sounds pretty challenging.
Yeah.
So no, but I think definitely we're looking more into things that we can see that are trackable within the app. So you can share a listing with someone, you can email a listing. So we definitely track those kind of things, but word of mouth I think inherently is pretty tough at this point. And I would say we haven't mastered that word of mouth tracking yet.
What about, do either of you guys take in word of mouth into in figuring out how much you can pay to acquire a first user?
We don't.
I think that goes back to kind of like the pure organic, and that goes again into our whole blended cost. Just all the users, cohorted over a certain amount of time, where they come from, if we can't track them, and we have, I'd say, pretty good tracking capabilities at this point, then we would credit them with pure organic word of mouth.
So if you have a paid channel that directly attributable downloads from that paid channel are not justifying the expense in that channel, would you just turn it off, or would you try to look at kind of what the, that it may be that if you've got a high word of mouth rate, so at companies like Dropbox and LogMeIn, where I was in the past, both of those companies, we had 80-90% of our users coming in through pure word of mouth, but that chain starts with somebody, and if you don't factor that in, you probably underinvest in marketing. Are you trying to actually run that level of analysis?
For us, well, first of all, we don't have that kind of rate of word of mouth. I would say of our organic users, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller because, again, to Jen's point, what is an organic user? It could be somebody who saw an ad on Facebook 3 years ago. So I would say we don't go to quite that level.
Now, are you guys using surveys at all to complement your directly tracked data and maybe your trend correlation where you're spending some money and seeing an impact, or?
No.
Not that granular. We've done some larger surveys, but it's really frustrating from a marketing perspective because everyone says a friend told me. And you're like, no,
Everyone
that's
says
not
what?
true. A friend told me, word
Yeah.
of mouth. And I know that's not true, but they think it's true.
Okay. I've always taken them on their word, so I could be. How do you know it's not true?
I don't know it's not true, but I know looking at our tactics where people came in from. Therefore, I know of the people who've come in what the channels are.
Okay. So have any of you actually tried turning off all paid just to see what would happen?
So we've done that. Once not intentionally.
It's amazing what you learn from the unintentional.
I know, right? This is a learning
I
experience.
have a ton of those learnings.
Right? We are all at the mercy of our paid channels. But yeah, so we have had that done before. And in terms of short-term impact, it's definitely measurable. You can obviously see like who is kind of the organic users for day zero. The long-term effects of turning off that is a little bit, I think, harder to glean. But I'd say that test was kind of more beneficial in terms of just like a very short-term impact, like who of that day, of day zero,
Right.
contributes to your system. And how does that impact your entire funnel within your own platform.
Right.
So how does it affect all the engagement points and all the kind of for us that would be like buying and social activities like liking and listing.
Right.
So yeah, it definitely helps for more short-term measurements.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is that you have so much momentum from the paid, where
Right.
you might have a word of mouth chain that goes for a long time. You've got good App Store rankings. Just turning it off for a little bit, it's hard to see the impact.
And again, like that would be more measurable if you have a smaller user base, and that would have definitely been a lot more measurable if back like 3 years ago for us.
Right.
Now I think it's already like a big machine, just like hurtling down the hill, so
Right.
it'll keep going no matter what you do.
So, which is kind of interesting if you look at the sort of the promise of digital was that we would be able to see what happened with all the money we were spending versus the old days of sort of spray and pray, and if you're growing fast, don't change anything, and because you might break what's working. But it still feels like we get into that same problem where eventually there is a lot of noise that's affecting our growth rate that we don't quite have a pulse on. Would you agree with that?
For sure, yeah, and that definitely impacts, I'd say, mobile a lot more than web. Web's obviously a lot cleaner in terms of tracking capabilities. Right now, we're still at the mercy of the OSs that we're on, as well as like our tracking partners' capabilities.
What about you, Richard? Do you feel like you've got a good handle on sort of everything that's happening, or are we still a little gray?
I'm an expert. No, no. I think that's one of the challenges, I guess, for like everyone at this conference is it's. Someone mentioned earlier, it's like the wild, wild west still. It's still a very young industry, so I think like there's a lot of things that we want to track that the technology isn't there, especially like cross-device is a big question. So I think that there's still a lot of things to wrap my head around. And like tying organic to paid and kind of like that whole journey, I still think that there's some steps we can take that we're taking right now to kind of build that story out more, but I still think that there's like a long way to go to have like the full picture of like how they impact each other.
But do you guys have a model that at least shows what your assumptions are of what you think? So you mentioned the blended cost, so how much you spent and in total what you're getting, and that blended cost is a mix between the paid and the organic. But do you have a model that tries to tell you what you think the paid and organic breakdown is? Does anybody?
We don't have a model, but we put all of the numbers into a report that I started about 6 months ago, where we look at paid tactics and organic tactics and we don't actually put owned tactics. We look at earned and paid tactics, and we map out what the paid tactics are and what the costs are, and the cost per video view. That's our metric that everything backs into. So you can see on each line what each tactic does, and then together you can see what the blend is for the earned and the paid together, which looks so much better.
Right. So do you have any channels that you feel like if you didn't factor in organic, they wouldn't make the cut, you would have to turn them off?
I think what we haven't really talked about yet is scale, and that owned channels and partnerships are hard, let's be honest. If you want to increase exponentially, you need scale.
Right.
And you're not going to get that without leveraging paid outlets.
Yeah.
So I think you need the paid. Without it, you can't grow at the same rate. It's gonna flatten out because you're going to hit all of the people you can hit.
Right.
So yes, we turn tactics off all of the time if they're inefficient. And we're constantly testing new things and trying out whatever we can.
So it's really like relative efficiency, relative tracked efficiency is how you make the decision of what you turn off. Okay, got it. So what are the paid channels that are working well for you guys now?
I think for us, given kind of the social nature of Poshmark, paid social channels are obviously what really works for us because the audience that is on a paid social channel is the people who would engage and just have very high engagement rates within our platform, and brings a lot of social energy into the Poshmark platform. So, you name it, like your Facebooks and your Twitters and your Pinterests, your Snapchat now. Those are always kind of our main suspects. I think the main challenge that Poshmark faces, and I think a lot of other advertisers face, is finding scale outside those main suspects. You know, that's scalable and just comes from a different source, because after a while the users that you hit are going to start overlapping.
Right. And do you feel like it's better to look for scale outside of what you just listed or within those big four?
I think the more diverse you can get with your channel portfolio, the healthier it's going to be. Paid social, the universe is huge there, but behavior is different, and that is definitely taken into account when we analyze all the users that come through.
And Facebook's changed the rules enough times that if you're too dependent on them, it's a little scary.
Exactly. Facebook can do whatever Facebook wants to.
So you're using social as well?
Yeah, kind of the usual suspects. So social, search, and a lot of like network partners. I think we're kind of network agnostic, so we just kind of follow the cohorts of people who are installing on all the channels, and we know our goals for paid, and we kind of are constantly mixing up just based on performance. So we don't have like a set list. It's always changing. Yeah.
So I would say, like Richard, paid search tends to be our most efficient channel, but that's because we use it as a bottom funnel tactic. So people are already looking for us when they hit our paid search ad. Also, paid social performs really well, and Apple search ads have been pretty fantastic. From our perspective, we do a lot of our targeting based on affinity. So anywhere where we can identify specific affinities, which is why social channels are so great, or where we can leverage our own data. So anyone who we can pass our data to, where they can either retarget those people or build lookalike models off of those people, tend to perform well for us.
So how do you discover the new channels? Like you mentioned Apple search. That's a relatively new channel.
Nobody else use it. Don't fit against us.
I'm hearing lots of good things about that one. But how do you decide to test that? How do you know that you're putting enough into a test to get a result, or do you just dabble and give up? Like how do you kind of approach that?
So that is something that we've currently been evaluating. I think it depends on the partner and depending on the technology. So if it's a partner that needs to optimize, we usually have conversations about statistical significance and how much optimization has to happen before the tool is smart enough to be efficient for us. So we talk about things like, okay, how many impressions or conversions are needed before we know if the tool will be smart enough or if this didn't work. And how to learn, we just kind of try to keep our ear to the ground and read the trades, and people reach out to us, and if they say the right things, we reach back out and ask more questions.
How about you? How do you decide new channels to test?
Yeah, I'd say conversations around statistical significance is very important. Like how quick is the optimization model that's in place? And definitely, I'd say this is where knowing people in the industry is very helpful. Like what works for you, talking to other people in paid growth. We all have relatively parallel experiences, I think, with a certain channel. So I think having those conversations frequently, especially since the landscape's always changing, is very helpful.
And you find people are willing to open up and...
You have to like give some, take some too. You can't just be like, tell me everything.
Cool. And so I think in particular that sort of the platform knowledge is really important, and so that's where you've been able to just have peers in the industry where you kind of exchange. Do you do like any kind of just deep documentation studying of new emerging platforms, trying to figure out what the angles are there, or? I
mean, we test, so conversations with other people about this, the very specific nuances of a specific channel is very helpful, because it could really take you forever to discover that.
Yeah.
So that's
and
really
the channel
helpful.
might not even know those nuances.
That's very common as well, honestly. But also, we also do considerable amounts of A/B tests to find, somebody will have a theory. Like, just have this hunch that, the CTRs, what sets like the delivery volume in like the first few hours. So, we had actually one channel manager on our team who had the theory that like CTR set delivery for Pinterest. So, like within the first few hours of the morning. So every morning she would get up at 5 a.m. and check what her CTR was, and we just run all kinds of tests to test out our various theories.
Okay. So Richard, are you guys playing like with Snapchat, for example? Have you figured out how to cost effectively drive growth off of Snapchat?
I would say no. I think well, I mean, to be fair to them, they're constantly changing their offerings. So I think like just being cognizant of like as they release new things, like what makes most sense for our target customer. Like for a lot of, especially emerging social channels, they're not always a perfect match for our customers. So I think we don't want to like close the door on anyone. I think like all of them are trying to diversify what they offer to advertisers. So, but no, I would say we haven't had.
Do any of you guys source new channel ideas from your customers?
From our customers in particular, I don't think we do that.
When we ran the survey I was talking about, we did notice, we asked people where they consumed things, and based on that, we did consider a couple of new partners based on where our audience was.
Okay.
And you can upload your data to Facebook and learn about interests and things like that, so that's another way that we look at kind of where our audience is and things that they might be interested in and maybe places we should be.
And then when you're working in these channels, obviously you have a lot of content, for example. Are you, like, how creative do you get in sort of working outside the lines of just buying an ad in trying to make these channels work for you?
So we tend to buy the ad because the more customization you do, the more expensive it tends to become, and therefore the less efficient it becomes. So I guess we have the advantage of what I'm doing is I find people who already love Pawn Stars and let them know that, hey, you can watch Pawn Stars in all these different places too. So a lot of the marketing that my team's doing, it's not getting people excited. It's not making people aware of something that they don't previously have any engagement with. It's taking a brand that they already know and love and getting them to engage in other places. So I guess I have an advantage over you guys.
You definitely have a great set of brands to leverage, everything from the channels themselves to the programs on the channels, and it makes sense. But this has been great, guys. I wish we had more time, but we're at the end. So hopefully it's been helpful for you guys to at least be able to see how to think about both organic and paid, and how one does help the other, but it's not a perfect science, and all of us struggle with trying to figure out exactly what's going on there. So thank you, everyone.